The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, my name is Anne-Marie Belliard from Adobe, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. Today we have Terry White, who is a Senior Worldwide Evangelist with Adobe, who's going to take you through a tour of some of the exciting new features in Photoshop CC. He will present for approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and will then spend a few minutes at the end fielding any questions that you may have. Also, you'll be able to answer post questions in the chat pod, in the question pod during the design cast, and those will be answered during the session. So you have a couple of ways to get your questions answered. A couple of housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute to avoid confusion. Please enter all questions for the presenter or technical difficulties into the questions box on your control panel. And then finally, the presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording in 48 hours. So this is being recorded, and it will be sent out to you. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Terry White so that he can start talking to you about what's new in Photoshop CC. Thank you.
Great, thanks Anne-Marie, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to walk you through some of the great new things that have been happening with Photoshop, and in particular the Photoshop CC update, and it's continuously getting updated with new things. So we just launched it or released it back in June, and it's already had 2 to 3 updates with new features and enhancements along the way. So let's dive right in, but just before we do that, I just want to point out that if you, of course, we're going to have a recording of this that we're going to post at the end, so if you miss anything today, you'll be able to see the recordings. But if you want to see more or things that I don't get a chance to show in this 50 minutes, feel free to head over to my blog at terrywhite.com or my YouTube channel, which is also linked on the blog, and you will find videos from just about everything I've ever recorded as far as Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, so forth and so on, and also things that I haven't recorded, meaning recorded by other people, at tv.adobe.com. So if there's an area of expertise that I don't cover, chances are someone else has covered it on Adobe TV. One more thing before we head in, let's go ahead and head to my web browser. For those of you who are wanting to come out and see these kinds of events, there's the Creative Cloud World Tour, or the Create Now World Tour, I should call it. And that's at adobeeventsonline.com/create-event. And what that will do is show you all the various cities where we are headed on the road to show you not only Photoshop, but of course all of Creative Cloud, design, web, and video. And if you're out of the country, we have European locations as well, and some Asia Pacific ones coming soon. So chances are we're going to be in a city near you, and we invite you to head out and check us out when you can. So with that,
Terry?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Terry, real quick, this is Anne-Marie. Can you try to speak up a little bit? We're getting a little bit of feedback that your audio is a little bit low.
Okay, is that better?
Thank you.
All right. Hopefully that's better. I can't hear what you're hearing, so hopefully that's an improvement. I just moved the mic a little closer, and let's see if there's a volume adjustment on it as well. All right, we'll try that, and hopefully that's better. And let's head over to Photoshop. And actually, before I go to Photoshop, I keep saying that, but I want to point out that Bridge, which has always been a part of Photoshop since CC, and even before, since Creative Suite, and even before Creative Suite, it was in Photoshop 7 as the file browser. Well, Bridge now in CC is a separate download. So if you're used to using Bridge and you installed Photoshop CC and you're like, well, where's Bridge? Did they discontinue it? No, Bridge is alive and well. And to get to it, you would install it separately, just like you do all your other applications. So Bridge, grew up and it became its own separate application for you to install whenever you want. And for those that don't need Bridge, maybe you're a Lightroom user and you're a photographer, then you don't have to install it. And I think that was the point, that people that need it can get it, and people that don't need it don't have to have it. All right, so Photoshop. Let's head over to Photoshop where I've got some images open. I'm going to start off actually with this particular image. I'm going to just start off slow, kind of talking about some things that got enhanced along the way. Then we'll dive in deeper with some newer features and features that you've not seen before CC. And then we'll end up with a couple things I think you'll like. So first of all, one of the enhancements in Photoshop actually is something that happened under the hood. So two things actually. The first one, if you head up to your Photoshop menu, there is now a sync settings feature. And what the sync settings feature will do is allow you to sync your Photoshop settings. You can check or uncheck which ones you want. Preferences, actions, brushes, swatches, styles, gradients, custom shapes, patterns, contours, tool presets, you name it. It's there for you to sync. Now, what does this do? Well, we realize that people often have two computers. Like, for example, you might have a laptop and a desktop, or two laptops, one at work, one at home. And you go in and you make changes in Photoshop in one of those computers, and then you get home and you don't have those changes. Maybe you created some presets, you created some actions, and it would be great to have those without having to remember to export them and bring them home with you. Well, now, just by doing the sync settings, which I just did right before the webinar, when I go to my other computer, any changes I've made to Photoshop or the interface will already be on the other computer. So that's the beauty of sync settings, and you'll start to see that in more and more of the CC apps. The major ones have it, like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign so far. Some of the web tools and video tools have it as well, and you'll start to see it across the board. But it is in Photoshop CC, and that, by the way, that was one of the updates that got that new feature recently. Now, you don't have to always go up to the menu to enable it, or you have to go up to the menu to enable it. But once it's enabled, you can actually go down here to this little button hidden in the lower left-hand corner, and this is your sync settings button. So whenever you've made some changes, you can just click that button and it will bring up the sync settings now, and you can then perform your sync, and it will continue to work in the background as you continue to work in Photoshop. So sync settings, one of the first new things in Photoshop CC. Now let's talk about this image I have open here, and we got this beautiful old tree with all the roots and everything, underground and above ground, and yet someone left their backpack there for whatever reason, and we need to remove it now. Of course, I'm a fan of the patch tool, for those of you who have seen me before, and in Photoshop CS6 we got the patch tool with a content aware option. And of course, it's normally on normal. And of course, you can switch it to content aware when normal doesn't do what you want. In other words, normal tries to patch it so that it blends in more with the surrounding area. But content aware also does that, but in many cases more accurately, especially when the thing you're trying to patch is along the edge of a photo. But in this case, I'm going to use content aware, because I'm dealing with so many different branches and roots and things along the ground that it would, normal may not blend it in properly. So what I'm going to do is just simply make a selection using the Content Aware Patch tool. And once I make that selection, the other thing I love about the patch tool is that it gives me a preview the minute I start dragging. So I can start to drag it and know when I've got things lined up, or even close, so that when I do my patch, it looks more natural. Now, of course, we're looking at that spot. We knew the backpack was there, but if you just walked up to your computer or just tuned in, you would have no idea that that item was there. So the patch tool does a fantastic job just replicating and patching things that even if I zoom in, it's kind of really hard to know what was there. And of course, I could continue patching out other areas that I want to blend it in even more. So now, of course, like I said, Content Aware Patch is not new. It was in CS6. But what is new about it is it just does a better job now with some of the algorithms that were changed under the hood. So Content Aware Patch, go ahead and check it out the next time you need to fix something or remove something in a photo. Let's head over to this next image here, and this will be particularly useful for the designers that are watching. A lot of times, Photoshop is used by all kinds of different audiences. Some are designers, some are photographers, some are in the medical field, architectural, and it's kind of nice to have features for everyone whenever we can. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab my path selection tool. Actually, not my path selection tool. Yes, I want my path selection tool. Okay, there we go. And what I'm going to do is just scroll in my layers panel, and I'm looking for the sail box. Now the sail box is this box that's actually around the huge backpack sale that's going on this potential website. And what the customers asked for, or what the designers asked for, is the ability to have rounded corners. Now this box was drawn with the rectangle tool, one of the vector shape tools in Photoshop. And if you've ever used any of these tools, you'll know and remember that if you ever decided after you used the tool to change your mind, you really had to start over. You had to delete the shape, recreate it with however you wanted to do it. So if I drew it with the rectangle tool and then later decided I wanted rounded rectangles, I'd have to delete that shape in the past and create the new one. Well, now with that layer selected, if I head over to the new properties panel, actually the properties panel, there we go. I don't want masks, I want, hang on for a second here, user error. Why am I not getting? There we go. So select the path first, and then of course go to the live shape properties. I was on the mask properties by accident. Now that I'm on the live shape properties, you'll notice that, and the reason it's called live is because this can be updated without me having to go in and delete it and start over again. So this first one that you'll notice down here in the middle is a chain link that will lock all four sides. So that is on by default. And now if I can go in and type in a measurement and be very precise, or I can just simply use the scrubby slider and kind of, and I think we nicknamed them scrubby sliders because you're kind of scrubbing back and forth. But I can dynamically and live update those corners just by dragging the measurement. And I'm doing it visually. But like I said, if I wanted a specific number of roundness, like 24, I could just type in 24 and they would all be updated to 24. Now, the chain or the link symbol allows me to quickly turn that off so that I can dynamically update just one or more corners individually. So if I wanted that one to not be rounded, but this one to be more rounded, I can do that as well. Although I kind of don't like the more rounded one, maybe a little less rounded in that corner. But it's up to you. You can keep them all consistent, make them all individually rounded, and of course, you're not just limited to the rounded corners or the corners themselves. You can also change other properties. So if I wanted a different kind of stroke, I can put a different stroke on it with a different weight. That again is dynamic. As I'm sliding that, I can see what that looks like and put as much thickness on that as I want without having to start over every single time. So now I can present that to the client or to the designer, and they could say, hey, I want you to change it and make that upper right corner not rounded as well. And you wouldn't have to delete it. You just go in and make that one simple change, and away you go. So I think anyone who's ever worked with the vector shape tools will benefit from that new enhancement about this being live now, no matter which shape tool you drew it with, and always being able to go back and make more changes. The next area I'm going to talk about, and actually I'm going to do a little bit of before and after on this one for you. By the way, let me close this one down. This is one of those situations where you have a customer, client, someone walks in and they say, hey, I'd love to have a nice giant poster, mural, wall print, whatever, of this photo I have. And you say, okay. And then they reach in their wallet to pull it out because it's a small snapshot. And you cringe because no matter what your scanner is or your method of input, When you take something small and you have to blow it up really, really large, chances are you're just going to lose detail. You're going to lose quality. You're going to lose sharpness, and that's always been the case. And there have been companies that have come out with third-party plugins for Photoshop that allow you to kind of upsample your photo and get better results. And the Photoshop team thought, well, why shouldn't Photoshop just do that better to begin with? So this is one of those enhancements that kind of removes the need to go elsewhere to enlarge or sharpen your photos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a side-by-side, and I know it's kind of hard to see the real quality difference on a webinar, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to, first of all, right-click on this layer, duplicate it, and duplicate it into a new document. So that way I can have a side-by-side. Now, of course, this one's zoomed in, which I'll keep it that way. Then I'm going to go ahead and tear the window off, and we'll come back to this one in a moment. But let's go ahead and go to the first one here. And I'm going to go to Image. I'm going to go to Image Size. Oops, not Canvas Size, Image Size. And in Image Size, this is where we typically do our upsampling and downsampling. Now, by default, Photoshop CC will now be on automatic, meaning it will try to make the best choice for you without you having to think about all the technology and everything that's going on under the hood. But I'm going to change it to the old method, which is the bicubic smoother for enlargements. That's the old way that Photoshop CS6 on down used to do it. And as you can see, we have a relatively low or small, pretty much web-sized image. I'm going to go ahead and make this image 4 times the size, 400%, and I'm going to increase the resolution from 72 to 300. So making it something that's much more printable. And by the way, speaking of printable, you could go in and you can even just use one of the presets to go to a specific size if you want it. So if you knew you had to print this as an 8x10 at 300 pixels per inch, you can just grab 8x10 at 300 pixels per inch. Now, it's giving me a preview, and again, it's doing it, but I can just look at her eyes and see how soft they are, but I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right, so now that's our one that Photoshop did with the old method. And again, I can use my zoom tool. I can zoom in on it so we can kind of see, yeah, it did it, but it didn't do it, great. So now let's go ahead and switch over to the other one. And with the other one, we're going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to use the new engine or the new algorithms under the hood. So let's go to Image, Image Size, same thing. We're going to do 400 by 300, but instead of the bicubic smoother, we're going to use the brand new Preserve Details. The Preserve Details is the new technology under the hood. So we'll just click OK. And we'll, let's see here, I'll try and position it so we can see them both at the same time. But let's go ahead and move our eyes over and move that one over. And you even on a webinar, you should be able to see the difference. If you look at the eyes, and here we'll zoom up a little bit more. There we go, and kind of get them close. But if you start to look at the freckles, you see more of them over here. You don't see a lot of fringing on the edges. You see the eyes that are much sharper. Basically, we got a better enlargement using the same photo using the new Preserve Details. Especially if you look at the teeth, how much sharper they are. Just an overall sharper image without destroying the quality of the image by sharpening it during the upsampling process. So upsampling, which is good for everyone, not just designers, but anyone needing to take a small photo and going larger with it, especially for print or output, will benefit from this feature. So here, let's kind of get them side by side there. And even zoomed out, I can see the difference with this one being much sharper on the right-hand side than the one on the left-hand side. All right, so that is the Preserve Details versus the old bicubic smoother in the upsampling. But Photoshop actually gets sharper in other areas as well. I'm going to show you one more. Here, let's close some of these down that I don't need anymore. And let's go open up. Let's see if I have it here. Now this is a different example, and in this case, what I'd love to do is just make the image sharper overall. Most photographers, one of the tricks of the trade is just, even if you don't need to do a whole lot of retouching with a photo, just making your photo pop more just by making it sharper is usually the case. So once again, we'll head in this case, we'll head to the filter menu. And in the filter menu, we'll do sharpen. And again, this is not a new thing. Smart Sharpen has been there now for a couple of versions of Photoshop, but like the other one, image size, it has gotten better under the hood. And as a matter of fact, you can even go in and say use legacy to compare the two, just like I did the side-by-side comparison before. So here, let's do it the old way first. And I'm just going to say use legacy. I'm not going to make any changes. I'm going to click OK and let it do it. Now, this one will be harder to tell over the webinar. Oh, actually, let me undo it. Let's make the duplicate first. Duplicate layer, new file, click OK. And now let's go back to the other one. And let's do the filter again. And I could just run it again, just like I did. And it got sharper. But what it will also start to do is, Smart Sharpen was smart in CS6, but it wasn't perfect, so it would start to sharpen some of the edges and you get some aliasing around her face. Now if we go to the other one, and we do the same exact thing, let's go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen, and instead of Use Legacy, we turn that off. And you notice we get a couple more choices like reduce noise. Click OK. And if we zoom in on that, we get a sharper photo, but it's not destroying the photo. So in other words, we get a better quality of sharpening. The skin is not as rough, but the eyes are nice and sharp. The edges look better. Those are the kinds of things you want to look for when you do this on your own photo. Look at the background, how it's much more grainy because it tried to sharpen everything in the background. Here the background's nice and smooth, but the areas that should be sharp are sharper. So Smart Sharpening has gotten smarter in CC than it was in CS6. All right, so that is a Smart Sharpen example. We're going to head out now and we're going to take a look at some of my favorite new things using Camera Raw. Now, the first new thing in Camera Raw, and let me open up this campsite shot. Camera Raw is one of my favorite things about image editing in general. It's built into Lightroom as the develop module. It's in Photoshop and has been since Photoshop 7 as a plugin. But in Photoshop, the problem has always been that even though you could run Camera Raw on RAW files, JPEGs, TIFFs, etc., you had to do it beforehand. Meaning, if I wanted to open this up in Camera Raw, once I had it already open, I'd have to close it and then say open in Camera Raw or do it from Bridge. Now in CC, Camera Raw still works the way it always did, meaning I could say still open this in Camera Raw, but more importantly now, it's been built into Photoshop as a filter. Now that opens up all kinds of possibilities because not only do I not have to close the image down first as a inconvenience, but more importantly, I can now use Camera Raw on any layer. It doesn't matter what the file format is anymore. It doesn't have to be a TIFF, JPEG, or RAW file. It could be just a layer that I have on any image because it's a filter. Now, one of the things that makes Camera Raw so great is that it's non-destructive. So to make it non-destructive as a filter, I'm going to go ahead and convert for smart filters first. So now I've got a smart object of this layer. And when I go to my filter menu, I have now the brand new Camera Raw filter in Photoshop CC. So when I do Camera Raw as a filter, it brings me right into Camera Raw, just like it always did, but I didn't have to close the image down, and more importantly, I could do this on any layer. So the first thing you'll notice about this photo, even if you're not a trained professional, is that it's too blue. Everything's blue in this photo. It's got a blue tint, looks like the white balance was off on the camera, but we can fix that quickly with the eyedropper tool. And it looks like this tint was supposed to be gray, so I'll just click on it, and we can quickly, easily get a good white balance. And I can click around until I find the one that I like best. And even if I don't like that particular one, I can tone it down just by adjusting the temperature manually, because although white balance should be at a particular number for each photo, your eye is the final judge. You make it whatever looks best for you. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull it down, just make it a little cooler than the very warm photo that we did have, and of course not nearly as blue. Now, white balance is one of my favorite things in Camera Raw because it's so easy, but I don't have to stop there. I could go in and say, you know what, I'd love for that sky to be a little darker and a little bluer, so why don't I use a graduated filter to do that? So I'll just pull down the graduated filter, and it gives me a nice deep blue sky because I'm just adjusting the temperature, which I can turn down or turn up, and I'm also adjusting the exposure, bringing the exposure down in the top area of the photo and not so much in the bottom area of the photo. And I could continue working on this photo and know that anything that I'm doing is non-destructive. So if I saw some spots in the photo I wanted to get rid of, I can do that as well. Click OK. That will make my adjustment, and because I did it as a smart filter, here's the beauty of it. I can always double click back on that Camera Raw filter on a smart object, get right back to my exact same settings, and now if I go back and I want to adjust this up a little bit, maybe it was coming down too much, I can make that adjustment without having to start over as you would with any other filter that wasn't on a smart object. So that's what makes it non-destructive. I can go back in, change the white balance, turn that off, turn that particular filter off or graduated filter off, adjust it, make more adjustments, and keep this photo any way that I want just by saving the changes to the layers. So that is Camera Raw as a filter, and we're going to see some more examples right now. So that was my first one, was just simply adjusting the white balance and the graduated filter. Let's head over to Bridge. And in Bridge, I've got some other files that I want to work on. And actually, let's go here, and let's start with this one and this one. Let's open these up. All right, the first one is kind of obvious what's going on for anyone who's ever tried to photograph a skyline from the base of it or at the city level or maybe looking up at it. You'll see that the buildings, it looks like this tower is leaning a little bit, even though it's not. It's just really the perspective is off. This one really looks like it's leaning. It's not a straight line up and down. And these look like they're leaning to the left. So it's like everything is pointing up like a upside down V into the sky. And that's what happens when you shoot up like this at tall things. Your perspective can get off. So we can fix that now in Camera Raw. We can fix it in Lightroom's Develop module, and we can fix it, of course, as a filter. So I've already converted this to a smart object. I'm just going to go to Camera Raw as a filter. When I go to Camera Raw as a filter, there is a brand new, under lens corrections, there's a brand new upright feature. So there's auto, level, vertical, both. And I'm going to go ahead and just walk you through them, because you'll be tempted to just always click auto, and then you'll never know what it really does when you do the other ones. So let's do the other ones first. So just leveling it, we'll kind of tilt the buildings so they're a little straighter, but it's not fixing the perspective. I could say, well, fix the vertical perspective, and that gets better, but still not perfect. I can say do both at the same time, and now we're really looking good. That's really looking straight. I can also turn on a grid to kind of see what everything's aligning up to, because the grid is perfectly straight. I can then turn on auto and have it do everything at the same time. So it's adjusting the perspective, level, horizontal, vertical, everything, so that I get a much better photo. So if I click OK, that's my adjustment. Here's the before, here's the after, so you can see just how much of a difference that made. Now the next one is a different kind of problem. Well, it's the same kind of problem, but in a different direction. Instead of the angle being off up and down, it's off left to right. It looks like the person that took this photo was off to the right-hand side shooting this window with the dog looking out. So if you look at the lines of the building, you look at the window's kind of leaning, and just all kinds of perspective issues. So again, this is already a smart object. I'm just going to go to my filter menu. I'm going to go to Camera Raw as a filter. We're going to go right back into those lens corrections. And this time I will just go ahead and click Auto. And Auto did a really good job, but it's not perfect. It's not exactly the way I wanted it. And that's the thing with Auto. Auto is either dead on, totally off, or almost as good as you would want it. And that's because it's a computer. It's not an eye. It's not looking at it the way you are. So the beauty of it is, even though I did auto, I still have manual transformations that I can do down here at the bottom. So if I want to adjust it a little bit more, if I wanted to move the camera a little bit more to the left, or take a side step to the left and adjust it a little bit more, I can just tilt it a little bit more to the left. And of course, that's creating a cropping opportunity here in the upper right corner and lower right corner. But I don't have to worry about cropping, even though I can. I can just simply scale it up just ever so slightly to fill the frame. So I can still tilt this horizontally or vertically until you get it just the way you want. And then we'll click OK. So here's our before and here's our after. Just kind of straightening that out and putting the camera directly in front of that window. And of course, I missed a spot there because I did it as a smart object. I can double click right back on it, get right back to those lens corrections, and I can scale it up just a little bit more. Click OK, and there it is, adjusted. So that is continuing down the Camera Raw as a filter path. Let's do a couple more here. Let's go back to Bridge, and I'm going to open up these two. Now, this first one is actually one of my own photographs. I took this in Traverse City, Michigan, up at an abandoned or vacant church. It's an old building. It's a log cabin kind of style building. You can see the logs here on the wall that make up the wall, actually. And as you can see, there was no lighting, no electricity, nothing going on in that room. The only light we see is coming from a window near the ceiling, and that window is casting a light here on the banister, on the floor, and on the wall. And I always wonder, wow, it'd be great if I could go back and shoot that again or light it differently. And now with Camera Raw as a filter, there's an additional option in Camera Raw. Here, I'll go to Camera Raw as a filter, and whether you're using it as a filter or not, you have a brand new radial filter. So we had a graduated filter before. Now we have a radial filter here in Camera Raw. So I'm going to go ahead and I didn't know where to even start in this photo, but I said, well, I kind of want the eye to be focused in this area on the banister. Let me go ahead and brighten that area up a little bit. So I just basically drug out the new filter. And keeping in mind, it's on the old settings here, so I'm going to readjust the temperature, get the temperature back down to no adjustment, 0. And what I want to do here instead is just adjust the exposure. I want to expose that area of the photo. And lo and behold, when I did that, I didn't realize that there were words on the wall that the sensor captured that I had no idea were there. And by the way, what's the difference between that and let's say a vignette? Well, first of all, a vignette is normally in the center of the photo. And secondly, a vignette can't be just moved around or dragged around like this. And lastly, you can't have more than one. So I can go ahead and add as many of these as I want. I can even walk around the building with my own personal flashlight now, and it's dynamically and live updating. And this is one of the benefits of having a 64-bit architecture in Photoshop, is that we get this kind of performance just by walking around with this filter in the room. So radial filter in Camera Raw, and of course in the Camera Raw filter as well. Click OK, and it wasn't just for exposure, by the way. I could do sharpness, I could do all kinds of things with that radial filter. If this was too yellow, I could tone it down just in that one spot. Next one, let's go in and go to the filter again. Camera Raw as a filter. And this is for the adjustment brush. actually, I'm sorry, the spot removal brush. The spot removal brush has always been in the shape of a circle. And it's great for removing spots in your photos, sensor dust, anything like that. And so I can go in here and pick another one. It kind of picks a spot to pick from, and it, heals the spot that you clicked on, and that's great. But what happens when you have to remove something that's not in the shape of a circle? For example, this little twig or bug or whatever this is down here, I'd love to remove that, but I'd have to make a giant circle around it and hope that it looks right. Well, now, for the first time, the spot removal tool can be any shape. It does not have to be a circle. So I can drag that and kind of paint that the way I want. I don't want to pick up from the water, but then I can move it around to where I want it to pick up from to kind of blend in that area. So non-circular spot removal. And again, you could say, well, couldn't you just do that with a healing brush in Photoshop? Yes, you could, but in Photoshop, it would then be destructive. You'd have to make an extra layer to make sure that if you ever wanted to go back and make any more changes, you could. With me doing it here in Camera Raw, and especially as making that as a smart filter, I could always get back to those adjustments and continue working on them. So if I don't like the way it did it, I can go back to the spot removal tool. I can delete that spot if I want, and I can do it over again. So let's make it a little bit bigger, and let's go ahead and paint. And let's pick it up and make sure we get a better one. All right. There we go. Okay. And if I wanted a new one, I could make a new one. I can just keep doing it until I got it the way I want it. There we go. So now it's been removed. So that is non-circular spot healing in Photoshop CC. All right, so we're cooking along here. I've got to switch gears now. We're going to switch gears over to those of you who are web designers or web folks. So I'm going to, first one I'm going to do is kind of one that came out initially in Photoshop CC, and then I'm going to do one that came out recently in an update. So let's go, let's actually go here, and let's go here. Now let me point out what's going on here. First one, actually I'm missing a font, but that's okay. The first one is, you'll notice that this is a Photoshop mock-up of what a web page would look like. As a matter of fact, the person even did it with a browser in the background. It looks like Firefox maybe, to kind of show the client what this web page would look like or this home page would look like. And of course, this is all just Photoshop and layers. So it's just building on this and building Photoshop layers to kind of show the person or show whoever what this might look like. Now, when you do this, and then you hand it off to the person who's actually going to do the web coding, they're going to write the styling for all this in what's called CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. And they have to start, prior to Photoshop CC, from scratch. They'd have to look at your design in Photoshop and try and mimic it in code. Well, let's head over to a couple of products. First of all, I'm going to go to Chrome. And in Chrome, I've got a page set up that has no styling. It's basically just the text for the web page that we just saw in Photoshop. Now, I'm in another product called Edge Code. And Edge Code allows me to open up HTML, see the code, work on the code. It also allows me to open up CSS, see the code, work on the code. And it has a direct tie or link to Chrome. So it can live update Chrome as I make changes. So for example, if I head back to Photoshop now, and I go down to, let's go to the background. Now the background is this gradient color that's in the background. One of the new features in Photoshop CC is the ability to copy CSS from any layer. So there, you just right click on the layer and you get a new copy CSS command. So I just copied the CSS for that layer to the clipboard. And if I head over to Edge Code or any code editor, but I can paste it in, and it just pasted in the CSS that makes up that background. Now if I head to Chrome, I see the background because of the live updating with Edge Code. So the background just changed dynamically. I didn't refresh the page, didn't do anything. All right, so let's continue. Let's head back over to Photoshop, and let's go grab, let's go grab the gear text layer and right-click on it and copy the CSS for that. Head over to Edge Code, and we're just going to paste it right in. And then we'll go to Chrome, and there's the gear text. So you're starting to see what's happening. I'm styling the CSS for this page, which points to that CSS file, by copying the CSS from the layers in Photoshop. So let's head back over and do one more. Let's grab the winter promo. Now the winter promo is a layer set, so it doesn't have to be individual layers one by one. I can grab the whole layer set and say copy CSS for this group. And it's doing it. Saw the progress bar there. Now we head over to Edge Code, paste it all in, and it did it for each one of those. The rounded rectangle, the promo link, the winter guide, promo winter. So it put in all that CSS. We head back over to Chrome, and there we are. It's put in the winter guide, or it's starting to style that. Probably should put a break in winter and guide to make that work better. But as you can see, it's bringing over all the style information from Photoshop, generating the CSS for the web developer or web designer without them having to write it from scratch. And more importantly, it's grabbing the exact fonts and styles and everything else to make this page look better. Okay, well that was one web workflow, and that was the one we started with Photoshop CC when it came out, but we have a brand new one in addition to that. That's great for the CSS. But what about all these graphics? What about all the other things? Well, let me close this one. Let me even open up one that's more complicated. Let's open up, let's see if it's in my recents here. If not, I will, yeah, it's in my recents, great. So here's a much bigger mock-up of a page, and it's got many more layers, and it's got many more graphics, and it's got all kinds of things, but this is all Photoshop, not a web page. So even where it looks like there would be a video to play there, it's just a Photoshop layer. There's nothing, no video there or anything else. Now imagine if the client that saw this liked it and then said, okay, great, go build my web page. What the web developer would have to do with your Photoshop file then, or you'd have to do if you were the web developer, as you know, you'd have to separate all of these pieces out. You'd have to make graphics of every single little thing because you'd want to build it in HTML as separate pieces. You would never want to build this as one giant graphic. So if I look at my guides, this is what we would traditionally do in the past for slicing. We'd slice it all up and slice the guides and hope that we ended up with something we could build out in HTML. So I'm going to turn off the show guides because we don't need to see them. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, show you where to turn this on. It's Photoshop's new feature called Generator, which is in one of the most recent updates to Photoshop CC. Again, well after Photoshop CC was released in June, we've continued to update and add new features. So this new feature of Generator just came out a couple of weeks ago. And if I head over to my preferences for plugins, this is where you go to enable Generator once you have the latest version of Photoshop CC. You just go turn it on. So now that Generator has been turned on in my file, the next one is, in Photoshop, the next one is to actually turn it on for the file itself. So when I go to my file menu and I come down to generate, there's image assets, and image assets is currently off because there's no check mark by it. Now I just want to point something out before I turn it on. Let's go to where this file came from. So let's go to my CC demo files. Let's go to Photoshop. Let's go to Generator. And here is the, and we can twirl this one down for now. Here's the actual PSD that I just opened. So, and it was last modified today. So as you can see, there's no assets folder here yet. I'm going to keep that handy. I'm just going to go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to go in and turn on Generate Image Assets. And when I turn that on, Photoshop is now working behind the scenes to actually generate all the web graphics for this file. How does it know what to do? Well, if we go in and we twirl down any of these, you'll notice that instead of just naming this layer arrow, it's named arrow.png. So in other words, whenever you put an extension on the end of your layer name, Photoshop Generator will generate that particular layer as whatever file type you specify. So if I put arrow.jpg or arrow.gif, that's what it would make from that layer. And I can even go in and have it make multiple ones, but I'll show you that in a second. So now if I head back to the Finder, there's the new Assets folder that just got generated just now. And if I open up that Assets folder, there's my arrow PNG that it just made, which it must be a white arrow because we can't see it. There's the bottom of it. And we can see that it's making these graphics for us directly from the Photoshop layers. So every single thing is coming out as a graphic if it were a layer in Photoshop that had been given a file extension. So let me show you, it gets better because not only did it make all those graphics automatically and in the background, it's continuing to monitor what you're doing in Photoshop. So if I go ahead and twirl down my layers panel, or this layer group here called Blog and Post, there is Join a Club, and there's the text that's called Join a Club, which is that text layer right there. And then there's the Join a Club layer group, subgroup, that is basically all the pieces that make up that, including the circle background for kayaking. Now notice what this one is called. It's called Circle BG1.png. And sure enough, if we head out to the Finder, there will be a Circle BG1.png. And that's what it made. But if I go in now and I select that layer and I tell it to lock the transparency or opacity so I'm not going, not painting over the background, and I grab a paintbrush and I switch colors. Let's grab a nice red, and I now paint on that layer. There we go. Change it to red. If I head back out to out to the Finder, it's already done it. It's already made that layer or that object or graphic red. If I now quickly go back to Photoshop and undo it, it's already made it gray again. It's generating the images that fast. As fast as I can make the change, the images are being generated in that folder. Now, here's another thing that has a great potential. Let's say I go in and rename that layer Circle BG1.png, comma, 200% circle BG1 A. So we won't have the same file name. So what that just told it to do was make two of them. There's now the one that's 100% and the one that's 200%. So if I'm making graphics for a standard display, there's my standard display. Here's the one for my Retina display. And of course, resolution withstanding. If you didn't have enough resolution to begin with, then it still won't look good on a Retina display. But you get the idea that you can go in and make these any way you want. Let's say that I also double click, rename, head to the end of the name there. Oops. Double click, rename, clicking too fast, head to the end of the name there, comma, and we'll call this one Circle BG1.jpg. So I can mix and match the file formats. So now I have the Circle JPEG, I have the Circle PNG, I have the Circle PNG at 200%, all from the same layer. So it's building out all these assets dynamically for me as I work. If I make changes, the assets are updated. It gets better. We wanted to help you along the process even more by not just generating the graphics, but generating an edge reflow project as well. So if I go to generate, there's the ability to generate an edge reflow project. An edge reflow CC is one of our new products that allows you to create a responsive website. And it has now a direct tie to Photoshop that I could turn on the syncing so that if I update the graphics in Photoshop, they'll update here in Edge Reflow as well. And of course, Edge Reflow allows me to make responsive designs of my now Photoshop layered files. So it makes the CSS for me to not only put this all together, but make it responsive. And that was all generated from Photoshop CC. So one more thing, then we'll open it up for questions. I left this one for last because it's just one of my favorite new things, and that is sharpening in a different way. So let's close this. Not going to save any changes. And now let's go out and open, or go back to Bridge. Bridge. There you are, Bridge. And let's open up, actually, I want to go all the way back out to here. And I want to open up these two. Well, first of all, you see this waterfall image, and you see the nice silky look of the water that's coming down. That's the way waterfalls should be photographed. They should not be just harsh water hitting the rocks. It looks more artistic, looks great. But how do you make one of these? Well, normally a photographer would set up their camera on a tripod and do a long exposure, whether it's 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it takes, just so the water motion is blurred, but nothing else is. That's why you do the tripod. However, if the tripod is hit, tapped, shaken, vibrated, whatever, then that's going to make everything blurry, including the rocks. So if I zoom in on this, I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but the rocks just aren't that sharp, and we know the rocks weren't moving. The rocks, I guarantee you, those rocks weren't vibrating. But the camera shook, maybe got hit by one of the waves, whatever it took while the shutter was open, we ended up with blurry rocks too. So I'm going to go to the filter menu, and I'm going to come down to a brand new filter under Sharpen called Shake Reduction. This is specifically for camera shake reduction. So if I go to Shake Reduction, it automatically identifies motion in the photo, and therefore it says, okay, the camera shook in that direction. And now if I hit the letter Q, I can kind of preview around this. This is what it looked like before camera shake reduction. That's what it looks like now. So it can basically sharpen up the areas of the photo that weren't moving or shouldn't have been moving while keeping everything else nice and moving. So that's camera shake reduction on a technical image that most people, won't have unless you're a photographer. Now let's see it on something that's more natural, something that we've all done. The shaky flower, meaning you shook as though you were taking the image and you got a blurry photo. And that's natural, especially in low light, happens all the time. So what we're going to do is go to the filter menu, camera or sharpen, camera shake reduction, and I don't have to do anything. Here's my finished photo. So if I click OK, and because I did it as a smart object, there's before and there's after. So just by applying a filter, I now have a photo that I don't have to delete, or I wouldn't delete now as quickly as I would have before Photoshop CC. Well, we have a few minutes left for questions. Anne-Marie, I don't know if you guys had any that you hadn't answered yet, but I'll take them now if I can.
We do have a few. The first question is, Terry, is Photoshop CC still downloaded and run on your computer?
Absolutely. If I go to my applications folder and I look at my applications folder, there's Photoshop. There it is. But there's Photoshop CC sitting there in my applications folder just like it always did. As a matter of fact, it's even sitting there right along CS6. So when you subscribe to Creative Cloud, you download Creative Cloud applications, you're getting those Creative Cloud applications installed on your hard drive. even alongside your older versions if you want to keep your older versions. So we don't remove anything, we don't take anything away, you're not running it in a browser, you're not running it online. I am running it off my hard drive. I use it on planes offline all the time. You don't have to be constantly connected either.
Great. The next question is, does sync settings sync my fonts between computers?
Well, sync settings doesn't, but if you're using, part of your membership includes the Typekit desktop fonts. And the Typekit desktop fonts is a feature that is gradually being rolled out to all Creative Cloud members. As a matter of fact, you'll all have access to it in the very, 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 very near future. But for those that have it already, these fonts are being synced between multiple computers. So if I go and install Typekit fonts on one computer, they will automatically appear on my other computer as well.
Great. Next question is, I have the brand new update to Photoshop CC, but don't see the Generate Assets plugin showing up. How do I get the update?
If you don't see it, then you don't have the latest update installed. That's because it's not something you have to do anything extra for or special for. But keep in mind, you'd have to turn it on in the preferences first, because you won't see it under the file menu. Like I won't see Generate here if I didn't turn it on in the plugin. So I would say definitely go in, make sure that in the apps it says your Photoshop is up to date, which here it says up to date for Photoshop CC. And by the way, your Creative Cloud app only updates like once every 24 hours automatically. So if you want to force the issue, go ahead and, here, let me tear this off. Go ahead and quit the Creative Cloud app and relaunch it. That will force it to check for updates right then and there.
Great, thank you. And we have a question about the generator feature.
Okay.
It says, how about when you intend to have multiple images in one location, i.e. a slideshow?
Okay, I guess I don't get the question. You want to have multiple images in the same location. Well, it's putting them all in the same folder, so they are in the same location. It's doing it by the layers, so I'm not sure where you would use it as a slideshow, because that would mean you'd have to make a layered file of all your layers first for it to generate, and if you're doing that, chances are they're already separate images. So I'm not getting what you're trying to do, but it is putting them all in one spot to begin with in a folder.
Okay, I'll see if we can get some clarification on that question, Terry. Then there is a question, does the generator export the images in place as you see it in Photoshop? And can you create a whole site pretty much from Muse just in Photoshop? I think those are two.
Those are two distinct questions. So does it generate them in place? So again, let's head back out there and take a look. If I go back to that folder, actually, let's go here. And let's go to the generator folder. So it's going to put them in the same location as the PSD. So wherever you save the PSD, you'll see a folder next to that PSD called whatever the name of the PSD is, -assets. In that assets folder will be all of the images from all the layers that you went in and gave a file extension to in the same spot. So if that's the in place you're talking about, so if I go like I did and I went in and made the change, changed it to red, it replaced the graphic in place. Changed it back to gray, it replaced the graphic in place. So I hope that answered it. I'm not sure what else you were asking if that wasn't it.
Okay, thank you. And then can you create a whole site, pretty much, site from Muse just in Photoshop?
Okay, so the question is, can you create a whole site in Muse from Photoshop? No. Muse is a design tool that is basically allowing you to lay out images, text, animations, whatever you want on the page. If you wanted to go in and mock up what you wanted the page to look like, just like we did today in Photoshop, and then use Generator to output the individual layers as images, you could do that and then place those images in Muse. But that last part about placing the images on the Muse page, you'd have to rebuild it manually. Meaning you'd have to look at the PSD, know where all the images were placed, and then place them in the same spot. There's no direct connection to Muse from Photoshop. But it could be done. So here, let me go back to that page or any one of the other ones. If I go back and look at this one, and just for the sake of keeping it simple, let's say this was all the part that you did, I could go in and rename all these layers so that I get them exported. And by the way, you'll notice, just as a side note and a tip, you'll notice that the text layers were not done with an extension, because you wouldn't want that text layer to be an image. You'd want to actually go in and type the text. So the text you would type in Muse, the images would be exported out with whatever file extensions you gave them, then you just place them in Muse to rebuild the page to look like you had it in Photoshop.
Great. Next we have another question about Muse. The question is, can you design a site in Muse and make it responsive in Edge Reflow?
Can you design a site in Muse and make it responsive in Edge Reflow? I want to say no, but technically I guess you could, because what you'd do is you'd make the Muse site, you'd export out the HTML and all the images and everything else, and then you'd have to go back into Reflow and re-put it all together, and then put in your breakpoints and make it responsive. But at that point, now you're out of Muse. Muse doesn't know anything about what you're doing in Reflow, and you're not going back to Muse to make any more changes. So if you wanted to start the site in Muse but get out of Muse and be done with Muse, then yes. But if you wanted to say, okay, I just want it to be responsive and then come back to Muse and make changes, no. Because the two don't know each other yet or today.
Great, and then I think we will conclude with this one very good last question. From a designer's standpoint, what is the best advantage of using Photoshop CC over the latest Creative Suite edition, which would have been CS6?
Well, I would say the latest, so what was the first part? How did they word it? What's the
best advantage?
The best advantage. Okay, so I would say the best advantage is, number one, all of the things I just showed you that don't exist in CS6. And number two, all of the things that are coming that won't ever exist in CS6. That's my best answer, is that this is already better and going to keep getting better. Because it's not like, okay, we're done with CC, you got to wait 12, 18, 24 months for the next one. We've seen updates already, and it's only been since June. So imagine what it will look like by next June. So that's what I mean by you're looking at this is going to be way better because it keeps getting better.
Great, thank you. So just as a reminder to everybody who attended, first of all, Terry, thank you very much for doing a great presentation. Thanks to the folks from the Photoshop team who answered questions in the chat pod. Thanks to everybody for attending. If you weren't here, we wouldn't have anybody to talk to. And thanks for listening to our presentation today. The recording will be sent out in the next 48 hours. It will also be posted on some of the Adobe social media channels, so you can look for it there. But the How Designcast team will also be sending a recording out to everybody who attended the session today. So thanks again for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
The organizer has ended the session.